Patent Files, brought to you in part by Acura.
Behind every invention lies a story.
Nothing like this had ever been attempted before.
Dreamers battling long odds.
A lot of the onlookers thought that he was mad.
Decisions that change history.
Does he take it to the patent office? No.
The intrigue behind the invention on The Patent Files. In a high-security control room an hour outside of New York City, a handful of highly trained people keep watch over the entire world. They aren't tracking terrorists or searching the sky for missiles. They're monitoring a global network of wire.
Every 30 minutes, the AT&T network transmits data equivalent to the entire printed contents of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
That data travels over 4 billion miles of optical fiber, a network so vast it requires 150 screens on a wall the length of a football field just to keep tabs on it. And that's only one company. We live in a wired world. Wire overhead, underneath, even on the ocean floor, connecting our phones, fax machines, and computers. A web of wire circles the globe and ties us all together. Wire is also our connection to the past, to the earliest telephone, and before that, the telegraph. Back to the visionaries who first recognized wire's potential to change the way we communicate. When and where did our wired world begin? More than 250 years ago, on the outskirts of Paris. In the spring of 1746, an extraordinary demonstration takes place at a French monastery. 200 monks, each connected to the next by a length of iron wire, form a human chain more than a mile around. Scientists have just learned how to store static electricity in a Leyden jar. And on this day, a physicist named Jean-Antoine Nollet has monks on each end touch the poles of such a jar.
All of them go, ow, at exactly the same moment. And this sounds very silly indeed, but it's actually very important. Firstly, it showed that electricity could go over a long distance. And secondly, it showed that it could cover that distance instantly because all of them said ow at the same time. And so this suggested that you could use electricity to communicate over long distances.
Wire is as old as the pyramids. Ornaments of gold wire have been found buried with the pharaohs. In the Middle Ages, wire is drawn through dies by hand and used to make suits of armor. After Nollet's experiment, scientists try to use wire to carry signals, but the equipment is just too crude. Ironically, it is one man's failure to make wire work as a medium for his messages that will usher in the age of high-speed communications. In the 1790s, dozens of towers sprout up across France. Operated by a special branch of the French military, they are the backbone of a new network unlike anything the world has seen before. It is the brainchild of a 26-year-old amateur scientist named Claude Chappe.
He tried all these experiments with bits of wire and all the rest of it, and he ran into all the same problems as everybody else, which was you couldn't get batteries and the wires weren't properly insulated. And so he thought, well, look, the problem I'm trying to solve here is communication. Maybe there's an easier way of doing this.
Chappe's work is interrupted by the French Revolution, which forces him to take refuge in his parents' country home. There he comes up with a different approach, a network of towers that can pass messages along visually.
Chappe originally wanted to call it the tachygraph because it means fast writer. This was a faster way of sending information than anything that had gone before. But a friend of his suggested that maybe telegraph, which means far writer, would be better because it was really about distance and not speed. And so the telegraph was born.
Chappe's optical telegraph has mechanical arms controlled by a system of gears and pulleys. There is a large crossbeam with smaller arms on each end. These can be rotated into more than 90 different positions, visible 10 miles away. Each position corresponds to a number, Messages are sent 2 numbers at a time.
One of them was used for a page number, and the second one was used for a line on that page. So I could say page 72, line 18, and then you would look at what that word was, and I've sent you that word, and that was how it worked.
It takes Schaap 3 years to perfect his invention. He is twice delayed when angry mobs destroy his equipment because they believe he is trying to communicate with jailed royalty. But by 1793, his tests so impressed the French government that it decides to build a chain of 15 towers, each 10 miles apart, connecting Paris to the border city of Lille.
The person at the end of the chain that's sending a message sets the arms on their tower to a particular configuration. And then the people in the next tower look through the telescope and say, ah, look what they've done. So they set their tower up to the same thing. The people in the next tower can see that, and so they set their arms in the same configuration. So this configuration of the end tower ripples down the chain, and it ripples very quickly.
Schaap's telegraph towers relay messages at more than 100 miles per hour. When the new line delivers news of a French military victory in hours instead of days, people take notice. The telegraph gets a big boost when Napoleon seizes power in 1799. Quick to grasp the military advantages of high-speed communications, he orders new lines built in every direction. By the early 1800s, the network encompasses more than 500 towers connecting all of France's major cities. Other countries soon developed their own telegraphs. Lines of towers begin to crisscross Europe and North Africa. In 1822, the British built a chain of towers like this one to connect London to Fleet headquarters in Portsmouth. They can send messages along at more than 200 miles per hour, astonishing for this day and age.
It's hard to believe that that was the networking state of the art, and there was this kind of mechanical internet in Europe, but there was.
One American visiting France is quite impressed with this mechanical internet, but he wonders to a friend if there couldn't be something faster, something perhaps using a spark sent over a wire. His name is Samuel Morse. Patent number 1 was issued by the U.S. government in 1836. Since then, 6 million patents have been granted. The patent files will continue in a moment, here on the History Channel. The man who will eventually bring instant messaging to the world is not a scientist, but a painter. He is also a fierce anti-Catholic who runs a spectacularly unsuccessful race for mayor of New York. Most importantly, Samuel Finley Breese Morse is a man of immense determination. It's a good thing. His quest to invent an electric telegraph will take him 12 long years.
Well, I think the secret, if there is one there, is ambition. Morse really wants to be famous. He wants to make money, but he really craves that fame.
And what may have inspired him was that he missed his own wife's funeral a number of years earlier because the news that she had died took several days to reach him. It's possible that he saw that there was a sort of social need for this kind of rapid communications technology.
By the time Morse comes along, more than 50 inventors have built electric telegraphs that transmit messages over wire. One system that a number of people have already invented has 26 wires, one for each letter of the alphabet. But no one has convincingly demonstrated a model that is truly practical. Samuel Morse's saga of invention begins in 1832 aboard a ship returning him from France to the U.S. A fellow passenger explains how electricity can travel instantly down a wire, and a fire is lit in Morse's soul.
He said, well, obviously this is a way to make a communications technology. And he thought he was the first person to ever think of this. But of course, people had been trying to do this for the best part of a century. The good thing is that Morse didn't know that. Had he known that, he might have given up straight away. But he was a very stubborn character. And it was really his stubbornness that meant that he succeeded where everyone else failed.
Morse paces the decks of the ship and begins to fill a notebook with ideas. He comes up with the notion of transmitting short and long bursts of current that can be fashioned into a code of dots and dashes. Back in the U.S., he lands a low-paying job as an art professor at New York University, but spends most of the next few years trying to build his telegraph.
Morse is really an unlikely telegraph inventor, one would think. He has basically no technical scientific training.
And rumor has it that occasionally, if it was a toss-up between buying some food or buying some equipment to continue with his experiments, he would go without the food and continue with his telegraphic development.
This is Morse's first telegraph. The transmitter is a cumbersome device that resembles a printing press. An operator turns a crank and feeds a row of metal slugs with teeth on them under a lever. That connects and disconnects the circuit in short and long bursts. Wire connects this to a receiver, where it activates an electromagnet controlling a pencil. The pencil marks incoming dots and dashes on a paper tape.
It was amazingly complicated, and it's not surprising that when Morse tried to demonstrate this to people, they said, "What's that? What do you mean that's a telegraph? Don't be ridiculous."
Morse perseveres. By 1837, his telegraph can transmit over 10 miles of wire strung up around a university lecture room. The following year, he heads to the Capitol in search of federal funding.
He set up his contraption on a table, and he had a big coil of wire in between them. But the problem was that he was actually just sending a message within the same room, and he was then holding up this strip of paper that had squiggles on it and claiming that this was a message, and a lot of the onlookers thought that he was mad. One of them said, "That's what I call pretty thin," and another one said, "That doesn't prove anything," and so the idea that this was a revolutionary technology seemed very far-fetched.
A successful inventor has to have a very thick skin. He has to hear people say, "No, I don't think it's going to work. I'm not going to invest in it. I'm not going to market it." He has to have some luck.
He spent several years, basically, carrying this all around and saying, look, this is going to change the world, and no one believed him.
Morse obtains patent number 1647 for his invention in 1840. By this time, he's been working on it for 8 years with little to show for it. When an art student asks if he can delay payment for a lesson, Morse responds that he will have to delay eating until paid.
He is not in good shape in this time, and he's not making much money from painting. It's pretty tough going.
In desperation, Morse goes back to Congress for one final try. This time, his passion proves persuasive, and a bill is introduced that would appropriate $30,000 for a long-distance test of his telegraph. February 21st, 1843 is a day of reckoning. As Morse watches nervously from the gallery, Cave Johnson of Tennessee, an opponent of the telegraph, tries to kill it with ridicule.
He said, well, if we're going to give money to this lunatic, you might as well give money to people who want to communicate using mesmerism, using hypnotism. And so he tabled an amendment saying that half the money should go to some mesmerists instead.
Morse turns to a reporter in the gallery. "I have an awful headache," he says. But Johnson's amendment is rejected, and the bill narrowly passes.
They gave him the money very reluctantly. I mean, he only just got it. A number of people didn't vote because they thought this was some kind of con trick, and that they were giving money to someone who was just going to run away and never be seen again.
Morse and his associates string up 40 miles of wire from Washington to Baltimore. By this time, Morse has replaced his complicated transmitter with a simple key. On Friday, May 24th, 1844, comes the moment Morse has worked toward for 12 long years. From a room in the basement of the U.S. Capitol, he slowly taps out the words, "What hath God wrought?" They flash over the wire to Baltimore in a split second. The instant message has arrived. 3 days later, the Democrats open a hotly contested political convention in Baltimore. Morse seizes this priceless opportunity. An assistant telegraphs up-to-the-minute dispatches to Washington. Thousands flock to the Capitol lawn to get the very latest news wired from Baltimore. Even Cave Johnson caves in. "Sir, I give in," he says to Morse. "It is a marvelous invention."
It was the internet of its day in the sense that it spread so quickly, and soon the whole country was wired up with a spider's web, I think someone said in the 1850s. It was even referred to as a great highway of thought.
In just 8 short years, more than 23,000 miles of iron wire crisscross the U.S. Wire manufacturing suddenly becomes big business, and companies spring up to meet the need. But not everyone understands the new technology.
Some people thought the messages were sent using liquid down the wires, or that perhaps the wires were sort of tight ropes, and that messengers on bicycles cycled backwards and forwards with them, carrying the messages on satchels.
Wire begins to reach across the ocean in 1858. More than 2,200 miles of telegraph cable are laid across the bottom of the Atlantic. It's so heavy, it takes 2 ships to carry all of it. They meet in the middle of the ocean, splice together their cables, and sail off in different directions. On August 5th, 1858, London and New York are connected. People take to the streets in celebration. staging parades and fireworks shows. But after only 4 weeks, the cable goes dead.
There was a great outcry because celebrations that had followed the completion of the cable were then followed by this great disappointment that it had stopped working. And a number of people said, well, maybe the whole thing was actually a hoax.
It takes 2 more attempts before Europe and America are finally connected by wire for good in 1866. Within 15 years, there are more than 100,000 miles of undersea cable. As wire encircles the globe, scores of inventors try to dream up improvements. One of them hits on an innovation way ahead of its time.
There was a priest named Giovanni Caselli who was living in Florence. He was sort of an exile from the church because he had angered the church and he was laying low for a while. But he was one of these itinerant tinkerers.
Caselli wants to see if he can send pictures over telegraph wires. He goes to work in 1857 and takes almost 6 years to perfect what he calls the pantelegraph. This extraordinary device stands 6 feet tall, and while it may not look like it, it is the world's first fax machine. At its heart is a pendulum, which Caselli has figured out how to synchronize with a pendulum on the other end of the line.
The original would be put on a platform, and swinging on top of that would be the stylus attached to the pendulum as it swung back and forth. And as it traced the writing, left and right, it sent an electrical signal to the telegraph wires, where on the receiver you had paper with special ink in it. When electricity touched the ink, it would set off a little dot, basically an exact copy of what was being sent on the other side. It was brilliant.
Caselli receives a U.S. patent for the pantelegraph in 1863, but cannot drum up interest in a nation gripped by civil war. French Emperor Napoleon III is so impressed, however, he authorizes use of the new machine on telegraph lines from Paris to Lyon. By 1868, the pantelegraph can transmit as many as 110 faxes an hour. Bankers send financial documents. Chinese diplomats send messages in characters. But it is more novelty than necessity.
The timing has to be right. If you create an object that's not ready for the public is not going to buy it.
When the Germans invade France in 1870, service is interrupted, never to be resumed. The pantelegraph becomes a memory, at the same time that other inventors start looking for a way to send voices over the wire. Many elements of Morse's telegraph were invented by others, but the Supreme Court upheld his patent because he was the first to put them all together. The patent files will continue in a moment, here on the History Channel. This telephone helped change the world. Built by Alexander Bell and Thomas Watson in 1876, it sits today in the Smithsonian. The invention of the telephone is a remarkable saga that begins with this surprising fact. Bell didn't invent the first telephone. Someone else beat him to it by more than 15 years.
The telephone could have been invented any time after, let's say, 1844, after the telegraph was available. And there were a lot of people who were monkeying around with it.
One of those people is Philip Rice, a proud but sensitive high school teacher in Germany. In 1860, Rice rigs up what he describes as an artificial ear. He also coins a name for it, the telephone, Greek for far speaker.
Structurally, it was a piece of wood shaped like an ear, had a hole in the middle of it, and then on this hole, he put a thin, stretched diaphragm. He used the skin of a sausage and stretched it out.
The sausage skin has a piece of platinum attached to it. When sound vibrates the diaphragm, the platinum makes and unmakes an electrical connection. For his receiver, Rice coils a wire around a knitting needle and attaches it to a violin. The signal vibrates the needle and makes the sound come out of the violin. It works, but poorly.
The sound that came over Rice's telephone was probably not very intelligible at best. You can hear that it's a human being talking, but you don't know the words.
Rice works on the phone for several years, and his models become more sophisticated, but they never work well enough to make the world take them seriously.
He sent these models to other places, and some of the models didn't work at all. People said it did nothing.
It's one thing to be playing around with the principles and so forth. It's something else to develop them and come forward with a commercial device.
Stung by the response to his beloved telephone, Rice abandons work on it. He dies of tuberculosis in 1874, just as two other telephone inventors are beginning a high-stakes race that will end up in a photo finish. February 7, 1876 is one of the most remarkable days in the history of the U.S. Patent Office. On that day, two strikingly similar patent applications arrive within hours of each other. Two men, 1,000 miles apart, try to patent the telephone on the same day. The oddest part is that the telephone is not what either of them set out to invent. In post-Civil War America, telegraph wire is everywhere. Western Union has more than 180,000 miles of wire strung across the nation.
If you walked through the streets of a major city, you saw telegraph poles filled with so many wires that they would blot out the sun, literally. And so there was a great business opportunity here to try to come up with a telegraph that could send many telegraph signals over one wire.
Two very different men are hard at work on this. One is Elisha Gray, a professional inventor in Chicago with many patents. The other is Alexander Graham Bell, a 29-year-old teacher for the deaf in Boston, who doesn't have a patent to his name. Each seizes upon the same approach to sending multiple messages down a single wire. It's called a harmonic telegraph, and it sends different messages at different frequencies.
Think of my keyboard here as a harmonic telegraph. A regular telegraph can play just one note or send one signal. A harmonic telegraph can add lots of different notes, each one for a different signal. And on the other end, a telegraph would decode that signal and play the individual notes.
Through patent filings and news articles, Bell and Gray become aware of each other's progress. It is a neck-and-neck race between Mr. Gray and myself, writes Bell. But their race to build a harmonic telegraph will soon become something far different.
Both of them arrived at the idea that it was possible to create a device that could send speech over telegraph wires. But this is where they diverged, because Elijah Gray thought that even though you could do this, there was no real commercial value in it.
Bell, however, is intrigued by the idea. He keeps it in mind as he pushes ahead on the harmonic telegraph. Not being a handy sort, Bell recruits a young electrician named Thomas Watson to help him. The two men hole up in a stuffy attic, trying to perfect their harmonic telegraph. One fateful June day in 1875 changes the course of their experiments. Watson recalls.
On that afternoon, his harmonic telegraph was working worse than usual. One of the steel leads in my room stopped vibrating, and I snapped it several times to start it going thus.
Watson has plucked it, and trying to loosen it up, has plucked it, and has sent this little twang, and Bell hears it. And he drops everything and says, "Don't move. I'm coming right over to see what you did." If he can send a little twang, maybe he could send the voice through the wire also.
Bell's excitement is not shared by his chief financial backer, who also happens to be his future father-in-law, an imposing man named Gardner Hubbard.
He thought like Gray did. Make the harmonic telegraph. We want to make some money on this thing. I forbid you to go after the telephone. So he stayed away from it for as long as he could.
But Bell eventually decides to defy his father-in-law. He sketches out some ideas, and soon he and Watson are transmitting speech, garbled but unmistakable. Gray, meanwhile, has put the telephone on back burner, but he eventually comes back to it and begins work on a patent application.
He sketches out a drawing for the telephone that is identical in almost every way. You look at these two drawings as if they were sitting next to each other when they drew them, to Bell's telephone patent that he's going to submit.
In February of 1876, Bell is ready to file a patent, but he delays while trying to secure foreign patent rights. That's when his future father-in-law hears that Elisha Gray has just shown up in Washington with a stack of patent applications.
So he panics and he says, "We'd better get Bell's patent over to the patent office before Gray does." And that's exactly what happens. He arrives there 2 hours before Gray does and gets the patent filed. And for that reason, Bell is given the patent and not Gray.
On March 7, 1876, Bell is awarded patent number 174,465 for improvements in telegraphy. He has the patent, but ironically, he and Watson still haven't been able to transmit understandable speech across the wire.
And that's the interesting thing about patents. You don't even have to have a working model of a patent. You just have to have the idea on paper. It doesn't even have to work. You don't have to prove that it works. Just the patent officer who's reviewing it has to believe that it could work and that it's an original idea.
Bell and Watson keep tweaking their phone, trying to make it work better. 3 days later, on March 10th, comes the moment that makes history.
Mr. Watson, come here. I want you.
Watson said years later, well, if we knew exactly which one of our little experiments was actually going to create the first telephone, we'd have come up with a much classier first words.
Even after hearing Bell's telephone with his own ears, Gray still dismisses it. The talking telegraph is a beautiful thing from a scientific point of view, he writes to his lawyer, but if you look at it in a business light, it is of no importance. By the summer of 1876, Bell has designed several working phones, but he is more than a little discouraged.
Bell had an all-embracing patent, but a telephone that was miserable.
This is a very marginal instrument. I mean, this thing does not work easily, and he sort of squeaks it forward.
Bell has such difficulty getting anybody interested in it that he approaches William Orton, the head of Western Union. They must have some interest in communication. He tries to sell it to them for $100,000, a mere pittance. And Orton says, no, I don't really think there's anything in the future of the telephone.
To drum up interest, Bell takes his phone on the road. He stands in a crowded hall as Watson sings into a phone from another city, using existing telegraph wires to carry the signal. The phone is primitive, Watson barely understandable, but audiences are amazed. Bell does what Rice could not. He makes people pay attention. This is the phone Bell eventually starts selling to the public. One of his first customers is the E.T. Holmes Burglar Alarm Company, which orders a dozen, and installs the world's first switchboard. Within months, the fledgling Bell Telephone Company has more than 200 phones in service, and linemen are stringing lines as fast as possible. Wire is now bringing far-off voices right into people's homes. What could be next? Elisha Gray eventually built his own phone and was involved in hundreds of lawsuits challenging Bell's patent. Bell won all of them. The patent files will continue in a moment, here on the History Channel. In 1878, the owner of this house in Hartford, Connecticut, becomes the first person in town to get a home phone. It's not long before he develops a love-hate relationship with it, and since his name is Mark Twain, he makes sure the world knows how he feels.
The human voice carries entirely too far as it is. Here we have been hollering "shut up" to our neighbors for centuries, and now you fellows come along to seek to complicate matters.
Twain is one of many Americans learning to deal with the telephone. By 1881, there are more than 13,000 miles of iron telephone wires strung across the U.S. and more than 100,000 phones. At the same time, a host of other inventors are jumping on the phone bandwagon, with results that will ring down through the years.
Hello? Hello?
In 1877, Thomas Edison invents a telephone with a much better microphone than Bell's. And while Bell thinks people should answer the phone "hoy hoy" as if greeting a ship, Edison suggests they call out "hello." His idea catches on, and early operators become known as "hello girls." Bell's early phone has no way to alert people you are calling. Callers have to shout or bang on it to summon people to the phone. So his faithful assistant Thomas Watson makes a modification.
Watson came up with the notion that if you thump against the diaphragm, at least at the other end, you'll get a louder noise, a click, 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 click.
Watson goes on to patent the first phone ringer, complete with electric bell, in 1878.
What number, please?
That same year, George Coy starts the first commercial telephone exchange in New Haven, with a switchboard built from the covers of tea kettles. As switchboards grow larger, phone companies number the plugs so operators can find them. The telephone number is born. In 1887, William Gray of Hartford has desperate need for a phone, but can't find one. an idea is born, and a patent soon follows. For the payphone, the first coin-operated phone is installed in 1889. One of the oddest telephone inventors is a Kansas City man named Almon Brown Stroger.
The story on Stroger is that he was an undertaker and that people would call up his place of business to give him business, and the operators on the telephone would waylay the message and send it off to one of his competitors. And he says, well, let me develop an automatic switching device that will bypass the operators.
Patented in 1891, Stroger's device lets callers use mechanical push buttons on their phone to make different connections through a switchboard. 5 years later, he replaces the push buttons with a rotating wheel and creates the first dial phone. In the 1880s, telephone wire starts to go underground in big cities. At the same time, iron wire starts being replaced with copper. It's more expensive, but conducts electricity better, allowing better reception and the introduction of long-distance calls. In 1882, Bell makes the first call from New York to Chicago. In 1914, the first transcontinental line is completed. 4 copper wires that weigh 2,500 tons and are supported by 130,000 telephone poles. Bell takes part in the first transcontinental phone call from New York to San Francisco. Who does he talk to? Watson. What does he say? The same thing he said 39 years before.
Mr. Watson, come here. I want you.
I heard these first words again, and fate decreed they should be the last he ever spoke to me. Alexander Graham Bell has passed away, but his successors shall carry forward to still greater triumphs the work that he began, and as long as man exists, the art which Bell created shall endure.
For nearly a century, copper is state-of-the-art when it comes to wire. Today, state-of-the-art wire isn't wire at all. It's fiber optic cable, a glass strand about the width of a hair. It doesn't carry electricity. It carries light. The idea of using light as a way to transmit telephone messages dates back to 1880. Just 4 years after he patents the phone, Alexander Graham Bell patents a visionary device called the photophone.
He figured, why not take a light beam and try to put my voice on the light beam, much the same way as he put his voice on a wire.
On Bell's photophone, the sound of a voice vibrates a flexible mirror. On the other end, a receiver picks up the tiny changes in light created by the vibration and translates them into an electrical current which powers a conventional phone. The photophone can transmit up to 600 feet, but only on bright sunny days. The potential of light as a medium must wait until the 1960s and the invention of the laser.
A lot of people think that lasers are just for zapping things like they do on Star Trek, but lasers can be flashed on and off very, very quickly. You can carry lots of digital information, which is basically flashes of on and off information.
A laser beam can carry 100 million times as much information as a radio signal. But after the first laser is invented in 1961, the question is how to carry that light from one place to another. Some scientists believe the answer is to use hair-thin fibers of glass to carry the laser light. But most optical glass leaks out too much light, so the signal fades after a few feet. In 1970, Don Keck is the junior member of a team at Corning trying to solve that problem by making fibers out of a pure glass called fused silica. One Friday night, he has a classic eureka moment.
I had a fiber in the furnace that had been heat treating for most of the day, and I really wanted to measure the properties before I went home.
Keck mounts the fiber in his laser test setup, then peers in a microscope that lets him look down the fiber.
All of a sudden, in my eye, there was a bright flash of light. It took a little bit of time for me to realize that the light from my laser beam was traveling all the way through the fiber, hitting the other end of the fiber, and a sizable quantity was coming back, hitting me in the eyeball. This was absolutely the first time that had happened, and I knew something very different was in place with this fiber.
This fiber transmits light far better than anything that's come before. The Corning team patents both the fiber and the process for making it later that year.
Little did we know that it was going to take many, many years before we could convince enough people in the world that optical fiber was, in fact, the transmission medium of choice.
The first fiber optic systems that were installed could carry a few hundred telephone conversations. The systems that we're installing today can carry over 20 million telephone conversations. That's 1 trillion bits of information per second, all on one tiny strand of fiber.
The year before the Corning team is developing the first optical fiber, a team at UCLA is wiring up the first computer on what will become the Internet. Our wired world is ready to explode into the future. Until 1880, inventors were required to submit models of their inventions in order to get a patent. Today, the Patent Office can ask for a model, but rarely does. The patent files will continue in a moment here on the History Channel. It sits on the 3rd floor of a nondescript building on the campus of UCLA, an obsolete piece of equipment that looks like a prop from an old science fiction movie. It also happens to be the first computer on the Internet, hooked up on September 2nd, 1969.
That same year, we did have Man on the Moon, Woodstock, and the Internet occurred. And the Internet wasn't even noticed.
Len Kleinrock is one of the creators of the Internet, which has wired the world's computers together. His involvement goes back to his days as a grad student at MIT in the late 50s.
And I was surrounded by computers at MIT. And I realized one day these machines would have to talk to each other. And there was absolutely no adequate technology to let that happen. So I started to develop data networking and basically created the technology on which the Internet rides today.
At the same time, an event is taking place on the other side of the globe which will shape the network to come.
October 4th, 1957, Russia orbits Sputnik 1, the Earth's first man-made satellite.
In 1957, the Russians launched a satellite and caught the United States with our pants down. And the government decided they would never let that happen again, so they created the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, which was dedicated to providing support for research across all areas of science.
Giant computers at different universities are being used for military-funded research. But there's no way to share information. The government decides to connect them on a network called ARPANET. It isn't a big hit.
Nobody wanted to join this network, A. B, when I did my research, nobody believed it would work.
In 1969, Kleinrock, by this time at UCLA, is chosen to supervise installation of a switching computer that will help control traffic on ARPANET.
It's the size of a refrigerator or a telephone booth. When it arrived, it wouldn't fit in the elevator, so we had to get a forklift to lift it up to this 3rd floor of the building we're in right now. It was quite an event.
It's called the Interface Message Processor. Its job is to break up streams of data into small packets and transmit it efficiently over existing telephone wires. On September 2nd, 1969, it is successfully hooked up to the mainframe at UCLA.
Essentially, the Internet took its first breath of life that day when bits moved back and forth between the switch and the outside world.
If September 2nd is the birthday of the Internet, October 29th is the day it spoke its first words. On that day, the team at UCLA prepares to log on to the computer at Stanford. To do so, a UCLA programmer will type in the letters L-O-G. Kleinrock vividly recalls the moment.
Charlie Klein, with a headset and a microphone, connected over this network with a voice line to the fellow at the other end. So Charlie typed the L, and he said, "You get the L?" The other guy said, "I got the L." He typed the O. "You get the O?" "I got the O." He typed the G. "You get the G?" Crash. The SRM machine crashed. So the first message ever on the Internet was "lo," as in lo and behold.
One of the artifacts in Kleinrock's office is the logbook, which records the successful hookup that finally took place later that night. By 1971, 15 computers are wired into a fledgling nationwide network. That same year, a programmer named Ray Tomlinson makes a giant contribution based on something very small.
He decided to use the @ symbol because it meant you were at that machine. So he randomly chose a symbol which A, meant something to him, and which nobody else would use in any sensible communications. And hence email was introduced to the network and it suddenly took over the traffic on the network.
3 years later, in 1974, Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn developed the now standard TCP/IP protocols for the growing network and give it a new name, the Internet. Still, going into the 1980s, it is mainly universities and government that are connected by wire. Until a young computer consultant decides it's time to organize his notes. The Internet was invented by many people over many years. In sharp contrast, the World Wide Web was the brainchild of one man.
I got into a lot of trouble when somebody called me the creator of the World Wide Web. I got an angry call from somebody who said that was preposterous because I couldn't have written all that stuff.
The story begins in 1980 when Tim Berners-Lee is a computer consultant at CERN, a giant physics lab in Switzerland. He's not very good at keeping track of connections between various people and projects, so he writes a program to help him. He names it Enquire.
Enquire, from Enquire Within Upon Everything, which was the name of a Victorian book I found on my parents' shelves at home, which was a collection of mishmash of all kinds of information. Great title. Enquire allowed you to type in a little bit of information about something and then make a link to another thing and type in more information about that and to sort of build a web item by item.
Berners-Lee begins to wonder if there's an easy way to expand this idea, to link information on many different computers. He writes up his thoughts and pesters his boss to let him take a crack at it. At the same time, he's also got his eyes on some hot new hardware, a new NeXT computer.
I didn't have any permission to do anything about it at all until I was called into my boss's office. He said, well, okay, why don't you get a NeXT computer and pick some project to use as a test? Why not that hypertext thing you're talking about?
That hypertext thing. Berners-Lee knows he needs a better name for his creation. He's been calling it the mesh, but it sounds too much like mess. Other ideas are found wanting as well.
I thought about mine of information, which is MOI, which is moi, which in French is me, which sounds kind of egotistical. The information mine was the way you could turn that around, which would be Tim, which would be even more egotistical. Having people talking about finding it on the Tim would be awful, I think, now.
He finally captures his vision with the phrase World Wide Web. In December of 1990, he sits down at his computer and in just a few weeks creates the first browser and server. Then he faces the duty of every inventor, convincing people he's onto something.
I could show somebody a web page and click on a link and voila, another web page. Isn't that wonderful? Well, not really. If you're going, that's like in a help system. You can go down from one page to another. What's so exciting? And what the difficult leap is, imagine that that link could have gone to any one of millions and millions of web pages, and that anything you can possibly imagine of any use has got an address, could be linked to. Can you imagine being in that world? Sounds complicated to me. I think I'd get lost.
Slow at first, web growth quickly becomes exponential. Many inventors head to the patent office the moment they have an idea. Berners-Lee goes in the opposite direction. He formally renounces patent rights to ensure the growth of the web.
And adding something such as, and it's patented, you have to pay a fee, would have completely scuppered the whole thing. It would never have taken off. We would not be talking about it now.
But talk about it we do. Thanks to the web, internet traffic now surpasses voice traffic on the wire that connects our world, and that we've all come to depend on.
We do indeed live in a world that has become communication-centric, and it's becoming more so every day of the week.
In 1793, a short message could travel by optical telegraph at about 100 miles per hour. Today, a global web of wire flashes vast amounts of information around the world at the speed of light.
I really think much like a subway train racing through New York City, it just continues to go faster and faster from one station to another, and there really is no end in sight.